Sean McInroy, how are you, my friend?
Mate, I'm good. I'm excited to chat today.
I'm devastated for the audience because we just had a 15-minute conversation about hair and skin health that didn't get recorded. So,
Oh, that didn't get recorded at all?
oh, it did.
Oh,
It did. We can add it in.
There goes our beauty secrets.
We can add it in. If they're wondering why we're talking about it again, maybe I did add it into the final edit. But, mate, pleasure to be here. One thing I will say is I've rocked up at your setup today, and we just stood there for an hour and had a fantastic conversation about many of life's great challenges.
Philosophies, yes.
It was a bit of philosophy, wasn't it?
for
It was
sure.
a bit of life jiu-jitsu, grappling with
Oh, I like that.
the challenges of life and talking about some of maybe our personal solutions. And you said something that I found to be really interesting. You said that you 5 years ago would look at you today and think that the product of the man that you are is inconceivable in the best way possible. I wonder, what is your philosophy for everybody listening who would likely have that goal to, in 5 years' time, think highly of the person they've become? What's your philosophy to do that?
Well, I suppose for me, to that point, is it's very hard in the moment to appreciate exactly what you've accumulated in terms of success, whatever success might mean to you, right? So for me, success is the freedom that I now enjoy to have complete control over what I do every day. I train some people face-to-face. I work with clients online who are all over the world. I make content, I edit content, amongst a number of other things. And I get paid well to do it, and I spend time with friends. I train with friends daily. I get so many things that I appreciate about who I am and how I operate day to day now. But in order to have gotten to where I am, it's just one foot in front of the other, right? I didn't jump from where I was 5 years ago to where I am now in one foul swoop, right? It's a matter of accumulation of effort over time, what I describe as seemingly insignificant details, right? I always bring it back to training, because obviously that's my jam, right? And try to explain things in tangible terms. Is every repetition you perform in the gym, every effort that you apply by itself out of context is seemingly insignificant. It doesn't matter, right? If one repetition isn't amazing in the context of all the other repetitions, not the end of the world, right? If you miss a training session in the context of months and years that go by, water for ducks back, doesn't matter, right? But that one effort or that one day accumulated through time, all the efforts and all the days and all the times that you put in, it's all that matters, right? So little things by themselves seem like they mean nothing, but they accumulate into absolutely everything, right? And so what I mean by that is, like, I'm only where I am now because of all the seemingly insignificant efforts that I've made, right? Whether that be editing a video that I've got to do this afternoon, whether that is a new application form that I'm putting together online, which I'm looking at my to-do list that I put together myself, and all the things that I have to do are seemingly inconsequential by themselves, but accumulatively they are the reason why I am who I am today and what I get to do, and I'm very happy about that. And I look at the version of myself from, you're talking about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 months ago even, and I think about what would that version of myself think about who I am and what I have to do today, how I'm operating, what sort of financial position do I find myself in, how do I get to spend my days, who do I spend my days with, what is my general level of happiness, I suppose, and that version of myself would be stoked, right? So that's the only metric by which I care about what I've achieved is by my former self, and understanding that I am where I am because of those little efforts. It's nothing drastic that I've done. And that's what keeps me on track as well, to do that application form later, to make that edit, to do all, I can't even remember because that's why I write these things down so I don't have to rely upon remembering them. But like everything that I have on my list of things to do on any given day, again, across the week, they seem inconsequential out of context of everything else, but in context of everything else, across that week, across last week, next month, the reason why I am where I am, and it's an appreciation of the little efforts, the details, that has allowed me to get to where I am. And knowing that 5 years, 5 years worth of those efforts over time, that's a lot of fucking efforts. And that's where the inconceivable version of myself is now, because of all the work of my previous self over time. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I was actually having this exact conversation with my brother-in-law last week. We were talking about a guy in particular who is a fucking god as a 40-year-old man. The way he trains, the way he looks, he very much looks after himself. Great dude. He's actually one of the performance guys down at the Dragons, and my brother-in-law trained with him jiu-jitsu-wise, and we're just having a chat about how much of a bloody unit this guy is. And we're saying that you often think about yourself as 28, 29-year-old guys as, what do I need to do right now to get the physique that I want, or to be as strong as I want to be, or to run the marathon as quick as I want to run it? And there is value and merit in that. But we rarely think about, if I want to be the kind of guy that I want to be at 40, what does 10 years of consistent, as you said, inconceivable efforts, almost, or insignificant efforts, you said, every day, add up to be? And I think that's just an incredible frame for anyone to think about their life. Like, what does 10 years of consistent hard work look like? What does 10 years of showing up in your relationship and doing the right things look like? What does 10 years of great, consistent friendship look like? The results are usually pretty profound in any area of your life. And I think that's such a great frame to consider, regardless of what you do and regardless of who you want to be.
Well, yeah, exactly. To that point, we often look at goals that we want to achieve, quite lofty goals, as almost insurmountable, because we're looking too much at the end goal and comparing that to where we are now. And that's, people have like a failure to launch sort of experience, because they can't conceive where, or how rather, they can get there, right? Why I say I am who I am now is inconceivable to who I was 5 years ago, because I didn't have, well, I'm saying that in retrospect, right? Because I have the beauty of hindsight. But at that point, say 5 years ago, so 2019, pre-COVID, and my life is very different since then. Pre-COVID, I was a PT in a commercial gym and sort of maxed out the hours in which I could do per day, per week, right? Okay, great. But I never foresaw the path that I am on now. Not because I didn't believe in myself, but because I suppose what I saw as any sort of end goal or trajectory I could go towards was too far off or too significant that it was not something to spend or even waste time thinking about I could do that, because it was, like, oh, that's not me, because you're not thinking about the steps, you're not thinking about those insignificant details that you need to do on a day-to-day basis to accumulate over a fuck long period of time to achieve something of significance, right? So one thing that I heard many years ago, that I don't know where I heard it, but it resonated, is like people will overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in 10. And before you know it, 12 months will go past, will be the week before Christmas, just to give away the date, week before Christmas next year. And what date is this coming out? Who knows? Anyway, it'll be
coming out next Monday.
Okay, there you go. It'll be this same time next year, and a lot of people wouldn't have moved the needle too much, right? I certainly lived that way for a long time. But I suppose it's not until maybe you get some support from someone who is speaking in an encouraging way and providing some support and some perspective, or whatever that person may need, hear the right things in order to get them to take actions that they need to. Former version of myself couldn't see that, right? We just kind of just do the same things. You're like, oh, I want to achieve this goal in 12 months time. Before you know it, you look back, I'm like, oh, kind of doing the same shit, right? Because you thought you could do a lot more in that period of time than what you would value to do in a 5-year period or a 10-year period. But I think a lot of people just don't have the tools, right? A lot of people don't have the tools to intellectually structure something. And that's not to say people aren't intellectual, but like I certainly didn't have the tools because I wasn't informed enough. Talk about intellect, right? I wasn't informed enough with what I need to do and how I need to frame little tasks and how I need to value that and how that aligns with a long-term objective and appreciating the value of being patient in getting somewhere and just not expecting an immediate payoff for all these little efforts. And then while I relate everything back to the gym, one, because it's in the context of what I do for a living, but if you go to the gym today, you're not going to see the results from today tomorrow, or what you do tomorrow next week. It's an accumulation of work over time, which then may lead, if you do the right things in context of everything else, will lead into bigger muscles and stronger muscles and some drop body fat, whatever your goals are, whatever you've trained for. It's the accumulation of those efforts over time in a very tangible sense, which will accumulate to the result in which you wanted to achieve. And that can be said for anything that you want to achieve. Where you are now, podcast number 258, did you say?
268. No, 258.
Right.
Right.
There you go. So 258, right? You're only where you are now because of all the previous steps and efforts that you put in order to be here. And I appreciate the effort for you to drive to my place to set this up and dedicate the time to do so. And you're only going to do so because you're passionate about it, and you've only justified the reason to do so because of all the previous efforts and things that have worked out, maybe haven't worked out. You've gotten better at it. You've learned from that, and you find yourself where you are now. And it greater incentivizes, moving forward is like, no, there's validity to this. This has got legs. I'm going to continue to push it. And as we spoke about before we started today, that has been proven to be very worthwhile because of the connections that you've made and the progress that you've made because of all these little efforts, right?
For sure. There's certainly so much merit in what you're saying there. I really want to go back to two things that you mentioned. I think there is so much value in your experience and your lived experience in going from succeeding in a commercial gym to now superseding what maybe you ever thought was possible, not because you didn't have the self-belief, but likely because of, I'm sure something you've heard of before, region beta paradox. Which,
maybe. So
this is really interesting, right? I found this fascinating when I heard it described to me for the first time. In the simplest terms, region beta paradox is like when you pull back a slingshot or you pull back a bow. If you only pull it back with half the tension, it will only go so far because there's a level of comfort that it exists in. So when things are going relatively well in your life, there's no real cause for change. It's like, well, I'm comfortable. I'm floating. Life's good. I'm not under too much pressure or stress.
I didn't know what that was called, actually. But yes, no, I'm very...
It's fascinating,
very
right?
familiar, and something that resonates with me highly, both from a work standpoint, personal relationship standpoint in the past. Yeah, no, I fuck with that a lot. Yeah.
So for most people, they will maybe question if you think back, like if you think deeply back to a time in your life where things were really challenging and you mustered the courage to do something about it, your progress is inconceivable because you're like, oh my God, I've gone from 0 to 100, or to what feels like 100 at the time, in such a rapid movement and pace. Why can't I progress like that ever again? It's likely because you're not under the tension. And that's not to say that you can do that all the time, because that's not exactly something that can be consistently reproduced. But there's so much value in what you're saying there. And COVID was a time that really pulled back the fucking bow on everybody, and it either crushed you under the tension or people found it to be very fruitful. There's another thing that you said that I think is so much value, and I love this idea, is you said that maybe you don't have anyone around you who's been able to light that path and be a champion for you. Now, I unashamedly love a rom-com or a romance movie. And one of the movies I love is Eat, Pray, Love. Great movie. My mum always loved it, got me onto it. It's a guilty pleasure. Javier Bardem, the actor, he has a great moment in that movie where he says to Liz in the movie, the main character, you don't need a man, you need a champion. And I think that all of us in life need champions at different points. And I think if you're sitting here listening to this right now going, I need a champion in my space, I think that it's healthy for you to think about how you can be a champion for other people in your life, because that's often reciprocated, right? And I see so much of that in what you do for a job, and especially the way that you personally approach it and your philosophy to training and coaching is you are essentially a champion for the people who want to make a difference in their life. Does that resonate?
Mate, absolutely. One thing, we'll structure there, yeah. have always been a very confident person in the gym space. I started going to the gym when I was 12 and was always very athletic as well. So I found, dare say, immediate comfort in the gym. And so by the time I became a PT in my early 20s, what I found that I organically was presenting as a coach, and my style, my shtick was performative, right? I was very
Everything you got. Everything you got.
Exactly. I was very enthusiastic to share the confidence that I had accumulated over years of training and inject that into the people I was coaching. Because one thing that I found was that, irrespective of whether someone was a confident version of themselves or not, they weren't confident in the gym space because they weren't competent in the gym space, right? And it's very hard to build confidence in a domain if you don't have a skill set in order to build that framework of confidence to be attached to, right? And so first build competency in someone. With that competency, we'll build confidence, simply put, right? Fun fact for anyone out there that is not too confident in the gym. Develop your skill set and knowledge, and from that, confidence will develop. And so that's what I found myself organically doing, and it's kind of what pushed me towards being more of an educator so much when it came to coaching people versus just a cheerleader. And because ultimately what I'm trying to do with people is to champion them, because they're the ones who have to do the work. I can't lift the weights. I can't eat the food for them. I can't get them up in the morning to go to the gym or make sure they go there after work or during work, whatever the case may be. I have to instill them with a skill set and a confidence in themselves and that skill set to be as successful when I'm not there, when they don't want to go to the gym, when they're already there and they can't really be asked doing stuff. They understand the value of what it is they're doing, and they hold themselves to an appropriately high standard, right? And what that actually means, right? Tangibly, what they need to do, how hard they need to work, all that sort of stuff, right? So you talk about, being a champion for someone. I suppose that resonates a lot, because that's the way in which my coaching style organically evolved.
It's interesting that you make the point, an appropriately high standard for oneself. This is something that feels like everything we're talking about today. I was talking about with my brother-in-law last week, because I'm going to say it again. But we're talking about this concept that in the gym or in life, if you have a set of standards that you hold for yourself, as opposed to just new goals to reach all the time, maybe long-term there's greater benefit in that. Because I find, personally, I'm one of those guys who loves a bit of balance, right? So I'm going to go for not all the time, but let's say I go for a 20K run on a Sunday. I'm not running 20Ks and not enjoying an almond croissant after. I'm going to have an almond croissant.
Of course.
I'm a relatively balanced guy by nature. It's how I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that I will prep for a marathon, get really fit, and then I don't long run for a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
I still train. I still look after myself. But thankfully, I've had a standard that I don't stop. Mm-hmm. I still do things. So my standard week to week doesn't need to be that I always do a run volume of 50K. Mm-hmm. It might be that I run 3 times and I get in the gym twice. And that standard keeps me in relative shape, I say shape, more conditioned, because the shape can get a little bit wishy-washy from time to time. And in that relative condition, I can go and do most things that I want to do. Now, at this point in my life, maybe I'm starting to set a slightly higher standard for myself, because there are things I want to be able to do more consistently or more often. And so I think it's an interesting point you make. But the question I want to ask you is, for anyone listening to this who goes, well, I don't really know what standard I want to set for myself. How do you start to develop that understanding?
That's a really good question. I think the way in which someone can do so without, obviously, like in a general sense, me just sort of providing generalized information, right, is to first discover someone's why, right? Because ultimately, you need to attach a set of standards. You need to attach a set of goals, associated with standards, right? This is all sort of interconnected into what someone wants to achieve and why they want to achieve it, right? If it is a common one, might be, I want to feel comfortable and confident to be naked in front of my partner, right? You might have let yourself go a little bit. You've had a few kids, whether that be male or female, right? You've become a little bit lazy and complacent in your relationship, and you're no longer as comfortable to take your shirt off or be naked in front of your partner. It happens often, right? So I get a lot of honesty and transparency with clients, which is fantastic because you understand how to connect with someone as a coach or just as a person. You learn how to connect with someone. You build trust. You build rapport. With that, honesty comes, transparency comes, and with that, we can identify what it is we are actually doing, right? Are we going to the gym to lift weights to get stronger, to build some muscle mass, to drop some body fat? Well, they're the surface level one-dimensional goals that we want to achieve. Nothing wrong with that. But what do they actually represent as something which is more meaningful, right? Because if you're going to the gym first thing in the morning when it's kind of cold outside in the middle of winter, knowing that your results might take a couple of years to achieve because you've let yourself go, or at least a number of months. So whatever season it may be, there's going to be probably some cold months in there. And so you're training in the morning before work. You don't really want to. It's a relatively new habit, etc. And it's like if you're just driven by what you think your goal is, which is to drop some body fat, and you haven't unpacked what dropping body fat actually represents as a greater connection and a greater comfort that you share with your partner to be intimate and confident with yourself intimately with the lights on, then you're going to, when push comes to shove, if you're sitting on the fence, you're not going to go to the gym, right? And it's really important to unpack your why. What do your goals actually represent? Because any physical goal that someone wants to achieve is driven by an emotional and or psychological root cause, right? People just don't want a six-pack for the sake of getting a six-pack. They want a six-pack because it represents something emotionally and or psychologically. People don't want to be stronger or build bigger muscles just for the sake of it. They don't. They just haven't unpacked the reasons as to why. And it might be something as significant and as profound as wanting to be confident in front of their partner again. It might be something, that they want to be seen as more attractive to women, if it's a bigger set of pythons or something like that, you know what I mean? Or it may be just a matter of, I feel I'll be more confident if I have the ability to fill out a t-shirt better. All right, cool. All right, you sort of unpack that a little bit more. You might get a little bit deeper into someone. All right, cool. But it's unpacking that why and identifying what it is that pushes someone in order for them to, make the efforts that they need to. And so going back to sort of how that relates to standards, right? It's like, well, if you don't first identify the significance and the depth of one's goals, you're not going to create a set of standards that are attached to that, right? Because if you don't know what standards mean, we talk about standards in terms of, standards could mean a number of things, right? It's quite ambiguous as a term, but standards in relation to achieving a goal, talk about a physical goal, training-wise, and it's like, well, a standard is that I set my alarm at 4:30 in the morning and I train at 5:30, and it's like, I never miss that. Right, my standard to help support that is I'm going to bed by 8:30, so I get 8 hours sleep. Even though I'm used to, prior to maybe making this a new habit, I'm used to going to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock. But I'm on my phone just scrolling through Reels or TikToks or watching TV, half watching TV while I'm on my phone for the last hour and a half at night. All right, well, your standard is, your new standard is that I am going to have dinner at 7 p.m., for instance, and be ready to be in bed by 8:30, 9 o'clock, so I'm getting 7.5 to 8 hours sleep. Because that's the only way in which I'm going to be able to get up and not snooze the alarm to then train at 5:30. So it's understand, and again, you need the strength of something which means more than just going to the gym to drop some body fat. Because it's difficult, and no, you don't really want to do that. But what do you really want to do? You want to be comfortable and confident in front of your missus to take your shirt off, right, with the lights on, right? It's understand how they're all connected?
I understand exactly what you mean. I think there's so much merit in it. I even think it's interesting to maybe ask you your thoughts around this. You mentioned how important the why is to achieving the goal. Mm-hmm. I think that the why is equally as important to not just achieve the goal, but to feel good about it once you've achieved it or not. because we spoke about before how important effort over reward or outcome is, because you respect the person you see in the mirror when you know you're putting in the effort in. And I find that one of the conditions of social media for the modern young man is I love Goggins. I'm all for a bit of Goggins. I think there's times where you absolutely need to go and establish some mongrel, and guys like him motivate people to do that. I think, though, that if your effort is always just for the sake of it and there's no why behind it, when you achieve said goal, whether it be run a marathon, whether it be you get yourself into incredibly shredded shape, and you don't really understand why you invested all that energy, you're left feeling empty.
Exactly.
And then you start to discredit yourself any time. It's like, is it worth putting effort into anything? Right? And so I think the why, man, so important for anything in life. Right?
Yeah.
For anything.
Well, I think it's a very good point there. Very good point. And it's something that, as a coach early on in my career, had me leaning towards strength as a means of training modality in the way in which I prioritize my focus as a coach, my sort of niche, if you will, because I would have anyone and everyone of any demographic that may be interested in training with me, and I'd work with everyone, and I still would, right? But I would have a number of, say, females who would quite literally show me their phone wallpaper, and it'd be some sort of bikini fitness model, some of which I knew, and be like, oh, that person doesn't even look like that person. And would be like, I want to look like this. And I'd be very blunt. I'm like, you won't. Because one, you just kind of, you look at how someone is at the moment, and it's not to shit on them. I wouldn't necessarily say you won't immediately. Wasn't that blunt. But I would listen to them and get the information that I needed in respect to why it is that they want to achieve that. Again, they would be telling me things that, you know, oh, I love the way she looks like this and she can do this, etc. Okay, cool. But firstly, like I said, that person doesn't even look like that person. They've dialed in for that particular day. They're not walking around looking like that. That's a heavily edited photo, for instance. But also, you unpack the reasons as to why they've presented that person or that image as something that they're prioritizing and they want to look like. Is because they think that if they look like that, they'll feel better about themselves. Again, it's an emotional, psychological driver for that physical outcome. I want to look like this because if I look like this, I will value myself more. I will like how I look more. I will be potentially seen as more attractive to people. I will be more confident, all these sort of things. And it's like, well, we can tick those boxes without having you look like this. But we need to understand what those goals are, because we can physically get you there, scratch that physical itch, and to your point, you can be very empty if we don't first unpack the emotional or psychological root cause as to why you want to achieve that physical goal. Because you achieve the physical goal and you haven't addressed the reasons as to why you thought you needed to get there. You get there, you don't feel the way in which you thought you would. You're completely dejected and empty and completely unaware as to what your next move will be, right? But now you've achieved a goal, a physical goal. You've worked really hard. You look the way in which you thought you needed to look to feel the way in which you thought you were going to feel, but you don't. And, well, that's very predictable, right? So let's not go down that path. And that's what led me down to strength, right? Because strength is very tangible and we can see improvements on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. Statistically, last week you did this many repetitions for this much weight. This week you did more, simply put, right? Or you at least did the same and it felt easier. Happy days. Where statistically, noting down progress over time, it's a very positive pursuit, right? I'm making improvements. I'm bettering myself day to day, week to week, over time. I've lifted so much more weight than I ever thought I could conceivably do. For more repetitions, I'm feeling strong. I'm feeling more capable. It's addressing that emotional, psychological emptiness, not to overplay it, right? And before you know it, I've mind fucked someone into actually realigning what their goals and their actions actually need to be, right? They'll feel better about themselves, but we've done so in a far more positive way by improving themselves and becoming more competent, becoming more confident, becoming stronger, very tangibly. We've got proof. We've got the stats to prove it. A lot stronger than you were 6 months ago, for instance, right? Versus a lot of people go into things with a very negative perspective. Like, oh, I'm not happy with myself. I'm not happy with maybe how scrawny I am if you're a guy, or maybe how overweight you might be. And so the goal is very negative. It's very negatively driven. Never happy enough with the size of your arms, or not happy that your stomach is too big, too fluffy around the midsection. Never happy with it. You're always wanting to do better, right? It's very negative. Versus we can address that. We can address the skinniness of one's arms or how much fluff you have around the middle. It's like, but let's prioritize a positive pursuit that is the betterment of what you're doing, getting stronger, building muscle mass, being positive with the metrics we're using to gauge success, not whether or not, you look in the mirror and your arms are as big as you want them to be, right? So it's just a reframing of the same objective. We'll get there just through a more positive pursuit.
It's the cliche that everybody hates, but it's so true that it is the destination, not the journey. You've probably seen it on something your mum shared on her Instagram story, that quote, wrapped up in a million different things. It's on a plaque at home on the wall. Like, you've seen it 1,000 times, but the reason it continues to be represented in the human experience is because there's truth to it. And I find that maybe one of the most dangerous mindsets you can approach any endeavor in life with is, I'll feel X about myself when I achieve Y. Because that has been proven time and time again to not be true. I'll be happy when I get... How many teenage coming of age movies did you watch where it was, I'll be happy when I get the popular girl, only to realize that the popular girl is the popular girl because she's a bitch, and that the chick who sat next to you in science class who loves you for who you are is the person you should have been with in the first place. Like, that story is the truth, the metaphoric truth of absolutely every endeavor in life. When you leave yourself in order to feel better about yourself, you're further away from where you want to be, where you need to be. And so I love what you're saying here, man. I really want to get to maybe a bit of practical application here for anyone who's listening or watching. Firstly, I think an interesting question to ask is, as men, we can sit here and talk about what it looks like for a guy to get in the gym, but there's, an equal value of women and men who listen to this show. And I think it's really interesting to pick out whether there's actually any difference in the approach that men and women should take to training overall.
Well, there certainly is, but I suppose where to start, right? Would you be more specific in terms of like any because I could go in any direction there.
Well, let me give you some specificity here, because I think that's really important. So let's say for the average person who's listening to this, they just want to have a relatively good set of standards for themselves. They want to look after themselves. They want to train 5 days a week, maybe enjoy a little bit of rest on the weekend, or a rest day during the week when they're busy and work and life is getting a little bit too much. But they ultimately want to be able to move their body and maybe go for a 5K on the weekend with friends, or during the week. They want to go to a run club to be social for 5Ks. They want to lift some weights so they're strong and they're functional. And ultimately, the goal is to be able to enjoy life in a healthy body and look pretty good too. Like, for men and women who have that kind of vision for themselves, should their training look much different?
In a word, no. What your training should look like will be dependent upon a lot of subjective factors. That being what you like, what you dislike, what you adhere to, what you don't, what through trial and error has been proven to be more or less effective for you for a number of the reasons that I just mentioned, adherence and whatnot. But ultimately, there is almost an endless array of ways in which a strength, hypertrophy, conditioning, or fat loss approach, or any sort of concurrent concoction of those, whatever your goals may be, whatever result you want to achieve, there's an endless array of ways in which a program can be put together, a way in which you apply yourself can be put together in order to achieve that, right? There isn't one set strength program or one approach to building muscle. And there are certainly some must-haves in respect to intensity, in respect to biasing more volume if you want to build muscle, or a little bit less volume if you want to build strength, because volume and load are inversely correlated, which is why a power lifter who is intently focused on lifting sort of maximal loads will do a lot less volume because they're lifting a lot more load than someone who's a bodybuilder, because they want more volume. They're not worried about the load so much. The load is simply just a means to make shit more difficult to accumulate stress to build muscle. Right? So we've got opposite ends of the spectrum there, but they're all spending time in the same space, applying themselves with what you'd argue to be equal intensity. They're making shit fucking hard, so it's effective. And whether their diet is a deficit or maintenance or surplus, one of the three, it's going to help determine whether that person is intending to lose weight, sort of maintain the weight in which they are, or gain weight. They want to build some more muscle mass and do so, with intent. Whether someone's male or female really doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter. Now, when we talk about the nitty-gritty and the specificity of male to female programming variations, women typically can endure greater training volumes, right? Why? There's probably reasons as to why. I can hypothesize is that men typically tend to have a harder time gauging, this is just my own personal experience with myself and training men, have a harder time gauging an appropriate level of intensity that isn't quite maxing out, right? Women will have an ability to go hard, know that they are not trying to kill themselves on this given set. They can rest a couple of minutes, repeat an equivalent level of intensity in the next set. Whereas guys will tend to have a default setting of, I'm going to give it everything that I've got. Once someone becomes a little bit trained, right? Maybe not from the get-go. Certainly not something I recommend either. Excuse me. Go hard as nails on whatever set they're doing and kind of cook themselves, and then they'll do it again and do it again. But, there is only so much in the tank after those first efforts were so maxed out, right? And so you see this decline in output throughout, say, a given session, right? And so the total volume which a lot of guys can get through typically isn't quite as consistently high as women. But in a general sense, without creating too much confusion, the overall approach should be very much a trial and error, fuck around and find out standpoint, right? Because we want to train, you talk about 5 days a week, anywhere 3, 4, 5, 6 days a week. For instance, you talk about the run and stuff and everything as well. You want to train as often. It should be a healthy relationship, right? Train as often as you enjoy exercising. The more often you train, the less likely you can train as intensely because you don't have as much time to recover. If that's what you like to do because you like a higher training volume, because maybe there's a social aspect to your exercise routine, you're training with friends, you're running with friends, etc. And so you're biasing, it's like, what do you value? You're biasing a greater training frequency and sacrificing the top end intensity, the difficulty, the loads of what you're doing, because what you value more is the frequency because of social aspects, as an example. And it might align with your goals a bit more. Whereas if you are someone who is focused on building maximal strength, whether male or female, well, it stands to reason you don't have the capacity to train as frequently because what you value is higher loads. Well, with higher loads mean less volume, but also means less frequency because you need to bias recovery more, because per effort, per session, per exercise, per repetition, shit is far more intense, far more demanding on your structures, on your nervous system. And so demands upon recovery, in order for those intensities to maintain a consistent high when you expose yourself to them, we need to prioritize recovery to balance out the intensity. Right? But that's more goal specific than it is male or female specific, right? Which is why I like to work with people more so on an individual basis and at least educate people the very best I can to understand that there is essentially no wrong way to go about things, right? If you're training and having fun and seeing progress, happy days. But it's also really important to define your goals, because if you haven't defined your goals, your why, what they represent, etc., then it's going to be a difficult time to, stick to what your goals are, because you don't have enough of an incentivification in order to do it when you don't really want to do it, which is a lot of the time. And you could be spending a lot of time and effort over days, weeks, months, and even years thinking that you are putting in the work to achieve a particular outcome, but the actions that you're taking, the program design, etc., don't exactly align with that, right? That was me for a long time, right? I trained with some very inefficient methods based on what I thought I needed to do to achieve the goals I wanted to achieve. It's only in retrospect that I was like, oh, okay, that was pretty inefficient, right? So that's why education, that's why, again, why I coach the way I do, why I speak the way I do, as a means to try to influence people to be as thoughtful as possible towards their goals, because it's very easy to be quite passive and just go through the motions and rely upon, oh yeah, I can lift weights and this is difficult in the moment. Yeah, it is, but have you adapted to that level of difficulty? Because you probably have. And we need to keep continuing to make shit more difficult, not tremendously so, but just a little bit more difficult than it was, in the past, because your body's adapted to it, right? So it's just tightening the screws. It's not accepting good enough for good enough, because that was okay when you first started, but if that's the standard by which you set, well, that's the extent to which you can expect to progress. Good enough.
Incredibly valuable information there. I think equally refreshing for people to hear that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to fitness and health, that it can be flexible, that you do have autonomy over structuring a specific plan to fit also your life needs, which I think a lot of people don't feel positive about. They feel like that fitness is this, oh man, it's just going to suck. And it has to suck if I want it to be valuable, which is not necessarily the case.
Not at all.
And I think when you talk about making shit difficult, but not all the time, man, that is one of the things I find most hilarious about the running space. Is when I started running, I had incredible progress in 6 weeks. I went from heaving over a 5K at 6-minute pace to running 25Ks solo in 6 weeks. Incredible progress. And it was funny, I had a lot of people I knew, like friends, go, man, how can you run over 10Ks? And I'm like, bro, you run 5Ks every day at 4:30 pace. You could run 10Ks too if you just took a fucking rest day and chilled out a little bit more on your 5Ks. It's hard to progress when you're always at the absolute brink of exhaustion. And I think a lot of people maybe are misguided in that training to your maximal all the time isn't exactly conducive to progress.
No, not at all. I think to your point there, it's a lack of education. They don't know, right? And people associate the effort that they're immediately putting into something to the efficacy of the accumulation of their work, right? We talked about earlier the seemingly insignificant details accumulating into a result over time. And understanding, that's why education is so important, understanding the process. You talk about the journey and the destination, and I talk about, in this along the same tone. It's like I've got to sell people into the rainbow. They want the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I've got to sell them into the rainbow, because that's where the results are, right? And that's the process. That's what's going to get you up in the morning. When I'm not there to get you out of bed, I'm going to meet you at the gym, or it's a day in which we're not training together, and you've got to get your ass there and get the work done anyway and feel confident and competent enough to be as successful if I'm not there or not, right? And so if you're going for a run, as an example to your friends, right? It's like, understand, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Again, working backwards from the goal that you want to achieve, and then reverse engineering it, right? Do you want to just consistently sit at that hypothetical 4:30 pace for 5Ks, or you want to dial, hopefully someone wants to make progress and maybe bring that down to a 4:15 or, or whatever it might be, right? So, all right, cool. Then have your training look cohesively sensical, that it will lead you to that objective, right? Or you kind of just in the moment making shit difficult for the sake of difficult. Where is the continuity in the actions and the accumulation of actions that you're taking over a period of time? Are you just arbitrarily coming into the gym and going through the same sort of upper body workout, pushing and pulling and stuff like that, same sort of weight, same sort of reps. Okay, yeah, it's more difficult than it would have been if you sat at home and did nothing, and you're essentially what I describe as exercising your muscles, but you're not training them. You're not challenging them to any degree of extra effort that's then going to force them to adapt and get bigger and stronger, right? Or to your point with your friends doing the runs, right? It's like, well, are you challenging your cardiovascular system and every other system, and your ability to flush lactic acid through the legs and stuff like that, doing the same shit that you've adapted to? No, because you've adapted to it, right? And like you said, the progress across 6 weeks is because you would have incrementally made shit that little bit more difficult, right? Now, as you become more, those newbie gains, that you experience in those 6 weeks start to dry up. All right, cool. Well, you do the 20 or 25 Ks you said you did. All right, cool. Well, what's the goal now? I don't want to keep just adding more kilometers. I'm going to try and get an average pace faster. All right, cool. And then from that time, all right, cool. Well, that really fucked me going from X amount minute Ks or whatever it might be, and shaving off 30 seconds on average or whatever it might be. Or maybe it's 15 seconds first and then 30 seconds, right, to be realistic. And then over time, all right, cool. Well, I want to be able to do that and be less fucked afterwards. So your recovery capacity has improved, right? So it makes sense for me to talk about it, right? Well, one thing that we use typically when in the weights room to gauge progress, well, typically the metric we do use is, am I lifting more weights, right? So it's lifting more weights than you did for the same amount of repetitions last week, the week before, etc., right? Or am I doing more repetitions for the same amount of weight, right? So progressive overload, right? That's the statistical outcomes associated with progress. That's what will determine whether or not we're making progress, right? But we also want to look at the subjective metrics. So that being technique improvements, that being your perception of difficulty, that is your recoverability and your confidence, right? So they're often intertwined in terms of their development, right? So you might be lifting the same weight and performing the same number of repetitions, but you've improved the technique quality of what you've done at that weight and at those reps. It doesn't feel as difficult. It's no longer a 10 out of 10 hard. It's now maybe an 8.5, 9 hard or whatever. Okay, cool. It no longer fucks you as much, right? You're not sort of exhausted. Your central nervous system isn't as taxed afterwards. You do another repeat set or something else afterwards. You can get through more work afterwards, and the next day you're not as rattled. And your confidence associated because of the accumulation of those other three has now been boosted, right? So you've now earned the right to put more weight on the bar. You can do so successfully. And that's what we want to rely upon before we just rely upon these standard metrics of progress, right? So it's helping people understand what it is they should actually value in the training space, which isn't just the rudimentary, have I lifted more weight or doing more repetitions? It's what is the technique quality like? What is my perception of difficulty? How hard does this shit feel? How am I recovering? And what's my confidence to take this on? Because confidence, as an example, is really important. If you're taking on a new load you haven't squatted before or deadlifted before, you can't half-ass it. You need to commit to it. Otherwise, you may hurt yourself. You sure as shit aren't going to lift it, right? And so you've got to earn the right to get there. What does that mean? You tick those boxes, you've earned the right to attempt it. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you're going to get as close as you possibly can. And it just means that when you do have another attempt, you're going to be that much more better positioned to be successful.
Yeah, stacking the odds in your favor.
Exactly.
And I want to make a note to what you said before. I love the distinction between exercising and training. I think that's really valuable. Something I need to think about and be more intentful about. But I want to ask you a question. I find this time of the year is a very interesting time of the year. And I want to come back to you personally here. There is a love-hate relationship that people have with New Year's resolutions, right? Because yes, there is value in reflecting consistently, regardless of what time of the year it is, and being self-aware about what you want to achieve, what you want to change about your life. But we're at the end of the December. We spoke about that at the start of the episode. And with that, a year wraps up and a new one begins. And I think there is, a bit of joy in finding some time to reflect on the year that was and objectively assess the whole year. One question I've been asking myself lately is, what is something that I become aware of at the end of every year that I want to change, but failed to do so. Is there an answer to that question you have for yourself?
Nothing particular comes to mind. It's more about just, I suppose for me, just constant betterment, right? Trying to be as introspective as possible, always looking at what it is I find myself leaning on when procrastinating, right? And trying to minimize that as much as possible. And it's giving myself enough space and time to incrementally improve shortcomings, right? And help to identify those the best I can. And that's why it's for me, like that I'm a very task-oriented guy. And so having the tasks that I have written down in a week to an opening paper diary that I like to use, right? In old school like that. And so I have those tasks. I can physically cross them off. I feel good having crossed them off. And I can see, and I know for myself, it's very transparent, those tasks that I'm, let's say, avoiding or sort of putting off. And what I just call it is productive procrastination, because I'm doing shit and I'm being productive. And so that's how I sell it to myself, is I'm like, oh, you're being productive. Yeah, but you're putting off the shit that you should be prioritizing and doing other stuff in front of it, which doesn't necessarily mean less, but what's that saying? You eat the frog or something like that first thing in the morning. Yeah, it's like it's that sort of idea where you do the most difficult thing first thing in the morning, and so it's like I'm getting better at doing that, right? And it's identifying that these older habits to not avoid doing the difficult thing, but just avoid doing it first and getting out of the way. And when I do that, I do prioritize it. Have we lost the camera there?
Keep going.
Okay. When I do prioritize it, I feel really good about myself, right? I feel really good that I have overcome that nagging habit to avoid these things, or at least put them off. So, in terms of going from one year to the next, I personally don't look at a year nowadays. I don't look at a year with any sort of extra distinction outside of just getting excited for what's to come in the calendar year and kind of looking, all right, cool, might do some travel here, might do a seminar there, etc., and meet up with this, you know what I mean? And kind of just like frame it that way. But I kind of look at every period of the year in a similar sort of way, right? When it's January, I'm looking at what does the next 3 to 4 to 6 months look like, and sort of where I am and what am I doing, and then the back end of the year, and then so yeah, a lot of people will look at New Year's resolutions with this level of seriousness and significance that will only be their undoing. People are very unrealistic as to what we said before, what they think they can achieve in 12 months. They think they can undo years, if not decades, of bad habits and poor choices in 12 months of really focused work. It's like, well, if it was that easy, you would have done it already. The last 4 years in a row that you made those same commitments to yourself. Be realistic with the goals in which you've set for yourself. Have some help, because you sure as shit are unlikely to do it by yourself. Have some accountability. Do it with a friend or voice it, write it down. Try to have a partner or a friend or a few people in your life hold you accountable to it, right? Not to say that they have to tell you what to do, but there is something about externalizing, writing down or voicing and having a conversation with people which makes these goals more real versus just telling yourself you're going to do something, because it gives you an out to fail or not do it, not make those commitments, because there's something about making a commitment to yourself and then voicing it to a friend or materializing it in some sort of more tangible way that really helps to, it's not a cure-all, but it does help to solidify things that little bit more, and it makes it that more real, I think.
I wonder, and this is something I consistently filter myself on, is in a world where so many of us are existing and consistently spending time on social media, and taking stock of the way that other people live their lives and the goals that they achieve, I wonder how many people's failure to launch, as you said before, on the goals that they set for themselves is because the goal you've set for yourself is the one you think you should have because of the people you follow on Instagram. As opposed to, I want to run the marathon because I want my kids to see that regardless of how old you are, you know, dad's still got it.
Mm-hmm.
Or I want to show up for my partner because I believe that my partner deserves more good quality time with me. Not, I want to look good because there's heaps of shredded guys on Instagram. Like, I think if it comes back to kind of like we spoke about before, if the why is not strong enough, regardless of whether your outcome's positive or negative, it's empty.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone, to your point there, I think everyone has a strong enough why. The issue isn't whether or not the why is strong enough. It's whether or not the why has been discovered. Right? Yeah, the depth of one's why. And that's the thing. It's like people will talk about, oh, you know, your why isn't strong enough. It's like, I think everyone's got a strong enough why. They just haven't been asked the right questions. They haven't been probed appropriately by the right person, friend. Maybe, again, why I've always been good at creating rapport with people and creating a connection with people. It's what's allowed me to be a successful coach, first and foremost, because most of the clients that I work with, especially from the jump or nowadays, they don't know the extent to which I can help them until I start to help them. They care about the experience in which I provide and the support and the very empathetic, I suppose, approach that I will have to their struggles and their issues, right? Because I actually give a shit, right? And so that helps people open up and they express things to me. And then from that, I get to discover the depths of their why. And then happy days, you know, I've got them, right? You know what I mean? And it's like, I've got my hooks in, and then I can really help to sort of push those buttons so they can get those results that they've always wanted to achieve because they've been asked the questions in which they've never been asked or asked of themselves, right? So I think everyone has a why, and I think everyone's why obviously will differ. Some people's whys are really significant and compared to others may feel less so by comparison, but it doesn't mean that it's less significant to the individual. Just the people haven't been asked the right questions, if have been asked questions at all.
One of the most repeated quotes on this podcast of all time is former guest of the show, Rich Davini, retired Navy SEAL, founder of The Attributes and incredible author. One of the biggest bombs ever dropped on this podcast. He said, Brad, the quality of our lives is directly proportionate to the quality of questions we ask ourselves. And I love that because I think so many of us exist in a reality in which we do not ask ourselves questions. We do not question what we're experiencing. We don't question our feelings or our thoughts. And in that, a very shallow existence is lived. And there is depth below the surface, which is why so many people find profound insight in podcasts where long form conversation allows you to get there. It's why they find profound love and attachment in relationships that have been long-term because there's a certain comfort and vulnerability that's created. And it's why they find such value in people like yourself who they can create long-term relationship with as a coach, who knows how to prod and ask the questions and get them there. And I think that's an incredibly valuable insight for anyone who listens to or watches this show, that there is beauty in the depth. You just got to go there.
Absolutely. I think there is a passiveness in which so many people live their lives. It certainly was me for a long time. So I'm not sitting on my fucking high horse and looking down at people and saying, oh, you're doing this wrong. And so no, I'm just preaching to a former version of myself, right? It is, I've become a far more evolved version of my former self. Hence, like I said, an inconceivable version of myself than I was 5 years ago, certainly before that too, right? And so I feel like everyone has that potential, right, to become a far more evolved version of themselves than they ever thought possible. I'm excited by the prospect of what another 5 years will bring, right? What that will look like, I don't know, but that's what I'm excited by, right? It's a general direction and trajectory in which I have put myself on and will continue to make efforts to go down that path. And everyone has that, right? Everyone has that potential. And when I talk about being passive, it's like I was in my personal relationships, like with friends, romantic relationships, business-wise, very passive, right? What was the term that you used? Sort of you're in that sort of no man's land, sort of it's not that difficult,
The region beta paradox.
Yes, that one. Yeah, very much found myself in that, right? Across many facets of my life. And shit wasn't uncomfortable enough in order to leave. Global pandemic was ultimately very helpful for me, right? Fucking gave me a big kick up the ass. But relationships had been like that as well. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people find themselves in those positions, right? Because you become complacent with a certain standard, right? Talking about raising standards, right? Certain standard by which you operate, you could become complacent by because it's like, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, partner's good, work's okay, kids are annoying sometimes, etc. All this sort of stuff, right? And so things aren't ever that bad. And it's like, oh, well, you should want more of yourself for yourself, right? But I think for me, there is too much of a negativity associated with the term selfish, right? Because selfishness is immediately associated with negativity, right? Because people think, oh, if you're being selfish, you are detracting from someone else. In order for you to win, you're being selfish, you're taking away from someone else. Well, only through one particular lens in which you're looking at what selfish represents. Well, the way in which I look at selfish is by prioritizing yourself, right? I am selfish in the mornings, so I wake up, I train, I hang out with mates, I grab a coffee, we talk shit, and then I start my day. Then I'm giving my energy and giving my time to other people, right? But before that, it's me time. It's me time. I never used to do that. And I found many years ago, after ending a relationship which wasn't serving me any longer, which was very tough, spending time by myself in the morning before I started work, go for a little walk, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever I could afford in the morning. I always started work early, so it was difficult. But I'd find time and go for a walk, bit of me time, which again, as a guy, didn't know what that was. But you just feel lighter. You feel good for it, right? And it's that selfishness of saying no to things or no to people and prioritizing yourself, right? Because ultimately you're saying yes to these things and yes to people where you probably shouldn't be. You're saying no to yourself, right? And so by saying no to other things and other people and prioritizing myself, being selfish towards me, not at the detriment of anyone else, but just because I had some boundaries and setting those parameters for myself, it meant that I could feel more whole, the cliche of you fill your cup first and you can't pour from an empty cup, all that sort of stuff. And rings true, right? Again, these things that I never understood or I thought were a bit woo-woo until I started taking those actions and prioritizing myself, being selfish towards me. And then, I can be a far better, far more complete, far more honest and all these positive attributes version of myself to anyone that I interface with.
Mate, it's a great point. I'm just trying to get myself in camera here as we finish up because one of the cameras died. But
come here, sit here.
Sit here. Let's get cozy. I think it's interesting you speak about the pour your cup cliche. It's almost like the champagne fountain. Mm-hmm. If you try to fill the bottom row first, the top row, it's impossible to fill.
Okay.
And, as you pour into the top glass,
yes,
it overflows into everything that is tiered below it. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think it's very relevant here because you have a business with Braith, strong dad. For any parent, that is the greatest challenge. How do I find a little bit of time to prioritize me so that the good things I give to myself overflow into my family life? And mate, we spoke about it before. I am constantly in awe of my two incredible parents. And in fact, of all the people in my life who seem to share this incredible quality that they have so much to give the people around them. And when I think about my parents, they were always healthy. They always looked after themselves. They always had time to do the things, not always had time, but always found a way to do the things that seemed to then allow them to flow into family life as parents who worked full time and had none of the potential luxuries that should give them any extra time or abundance that other people had. But fuck, they did a great job. And I think if you can find that, whether it's 20 minutes for a walk, it's so valuable for you.
Yeah, look, I think having the understanding that you talked about before about being a champion. You say your parents were very much those people, right? There is something so incredibly fulfilling about helping people, like more so than you get any sort of financial reward could associate, right? That's why people volunteer in charities, not just because charities are often in need of those sort of people, but because it gives so much back to the people who are volunteering, right? You know, it took me a long time to refer to what I do for a living when I first started becoming a personal trainer full-time as work, because I'm just hanging out with people, helping develop their confidence and skills and chatting shit for an hour at a time, right? And it was hardly work. I'd worked in jobs where you're going in, you're clocking on, you're doing menial shit and getting paid to do tasks which are anything but fulfilling in order to get money to live your life outside of those hours. You know, very much the social norm, right? And I grew up not understanding that there were options, I suppose. There were things that I could be doing that were aligned with a talent, a skill set, and a passion that I have that was, I suppose, at the time, relatively undiscovered, to help people and then get paid well to do it, especially in contrast to what I was doing. And it's like, oh wow, this isn't work at all. Because you think about what work actually means as a word, you got to work at something. There's a inference of difficulty associated. It's like, apart from obviously developing a skill set, and refining that skill set as a coach, like you would in any field, it wasn't difficult by any stretch of the imagination, because there was so much fulfillment that I get back. I'm like, I'm getting paid what to do this? I'm like, oh, do this for free. You know what I mean? And so I can see why your parents were the way they were in that respect. And, you talked about before about being a champion for, if you're looking for a champion yourself, try to be that for other people. And I think you'll find that these situations and the champions that you're looking for may very well organically present themselves, because you start to operate at that sort of level. Right? You operate at a frequency, the way I would try to describe it, right? You're operating at a frequency which is consistent with the people in which you're trying to attract, right? So rather than just trying to look for people to help you, it's like, well, I'm a big what goes around comes around kind of guy, right? For a number of reasons. And I think you put out the energy that you want to attract back, right? So if you're looking for help from people, you're wanting to be championed, right? I think if you are championing and helping other people, you start to think and operate at the same sort of wavelengths and frequencies in which those people that you are wanting to get support from. And I don't think you'd be too surprised if people are then wanting to help you out, because there's something really valuable in that reciprocity, and there's something that is a very attractive, I should say, in the way in which you're helping someone else. It's like, I like that guy. I fuck with that guy. I see what that person's energy is like. I see how that person operates, what their values are. And you find that like-minded people want to spend time with one another. Sure. And whether you are on the same experience as someone else, journey-wise, or you're just operating on that same level, I think it's the best way to try and find people that can help better level you up.
Yeah, certainly found that to be true in my life. Brother, we've had a good old yarn here, and I'm very mindful of your time because you're a busy cat.
That's okay, mate. If you haven't quite cottoned on, I can talk the back legs off a chair, right? So,
mate,
yeah.
it's what we like. It's what we like. It's a very good skill to have if you're going to sit on a podcast. So I want to thank you, mate. I want to make sure that
thank you very much.
Everybody who's listening to this, loving what you have to say, watching, knows that everywhere they can find you will be in the show notes. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you want to say? I know I'm the one who's supposed to ask the questions, but is there anything you'd like to say or convey to the audience before we finish up?
Oh, gosh. I suppose if there's one takeaway as a coach, one thing that I suppose that I enjoyed the entire chat. But again, I like actionable things for people, right? I think there's a lot of chat nowadays, certainly a lot of podcasts. People listen to podcasts, and if you've gotten this far, well done. But I like to give takeaways. People talk a lot and don't take action anywhere near as much as they should. And if there's one, I suppose, set of actionable directives I can provide, is that don't overcomplicate your process. Keep shit simple, because simple shit done well will outperform complicated shit done poorly, right? So whether that is a training program, whether that is a nutritional protocol, whether that is a set of tasks you give yourself to do to accumulate to a result you want to achieve, keep things simple. I've always done that. You talk to people who are of great success, they keep things simple, right? Simple things means you are less cluttered in your mind, and understand the folly of enthusiasm, right? What I mean by that is when you are enthusiastic and motivated, you will set expectations that are far too high, and think, oh no, I can do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. Good, calm your tits, put less on your plate, make it achievable and something that is then consistently achievable over time. And say it's like, we're talking tasks in a general sense, all right? Instead of giving yourself 6 or 8 things to do in a given day, outside of maybe work hours that you have, I don't know, trying to be as generalized as possible here, just make it 4. What are 4 things that you can do to improve your life and your situation relative to some goals and some whys that you've determined for yourself? 4 things per day. Could be 3. All right, 3. But you do 3 across 7 days a week. That's 21. That's 21 pretty confidently done things, right? Versus you're trying to do like 6 or 8 in one day and you're going to get through 5. One, you'll feel like a fucking failure because you didn't do all the things you weren't able to do anyway and it wasn't realistically achievable. You're off on a bad foot. And then the next day, you're like, oh, I didn't do the 3 from yesterday, plus I've got another 5 or 6 or 7 things. Okay. See what I mean? And again, I've done that before. I think you've probably done that before. So many people do these things, right? You set the standards by which you hold yourself accountable too high, not low enough. One thing I listened to, got from Jordan Peterson is, right, setting a standard appropriately low, right? Appropriately low. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. I was like, well, no. Well, where you are now is where you are now. All right, cool. Where you want to get to is, some level of significance higher above that. All right, well, what is moving the needle just a little bit to make an improvement from today to tomorrow? All right, cool. And then the next day, and then the next day, and consistently doing so. What's something you can consistently do to improve your situation, whatever it may be, talking in generalities here. And it's the appreciation of the process over time. It's just those little incremental improvements, which by themselves are seemingly insignificant, but in accumulation, literally is everything.
Mate, I think it's a fantastic point. Put it this way, when I was 17, I thought I'd look like Sonny Bill right now. Realised that maybe my expectations were a little bit high. Looking more like Steve from accounting at the real estate office. So it's, mate, I think very valuable things that you're saying. I love sitting and chatting to you. You've been, I mean this in the most complimentary way possible, incredibly surprising as a person. Mm-hmm. I love the way that your brain works. I love your philosophy. And I love that, for me, you're a very fun, interesting and personable guy. Mm-hmm. But I love that behind that there is so much more that I feel like we've got a chance to explore a little bit of today. Mm-hmm. So appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Cheers, mate.
Yes.
That was fun.
Yes, I agree. I had a lot of fun.
Have you ever watched the movie I Love You, Man?
I have, but not for a long time.
There's a great scene in that movie. I was watching it recently because...
It's Jason Segel.
And Paul Rudd.
And who?
Paul Rudd.
Paul Rudd, that's right.
And then Andy Samberg's in it. And there's that great scene in the movie where, the guy who plays... Yeah, well, we're recording, so okay. There's that guy in the movie who plays Boyle in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And there's that scene where he's spotting the guy on the incline bench and he's like, everything you got. Everything you got. You know that scene?
I do.
We've been saying that a lot at the house lately because we've got the gym set up in the garage. It's certainly not as fancy as this, but it's just a great space to go. And I call it medium testosterone zone because when you can only grow a mo like this, you're certainly not high test.
How many weeks, or dare I say months, growth is that?
It's actually, I shaved it yesterday because it was looking...
Shaved it yesterday? That's not too bad.
I
clipped it.
Okay. So I usually clean shave, but I had... The last week of November, I was like, I'll put in a bit of an effort. Mm-hmm. And I know, Keegan Hipgrave.
Yes, he was here yesterday.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. I was looking at his luscious moustache every day on Instagram, and I'm like, I should put in a bit of an effort. And mine always looks like, Chinese rice farmer.
A bit of Fu Manchu.
Yeah. One of those ones. And I'm like,
absolutely.
fuck. So I have to, if I let it go past a week, it's just diminishing returns, man. So
Mate, I shaved yesterday. No. This is, I think, about 2.5 weeks. So the longest it's been in a hot minute.
Because you usually keep the mo, or at least in your profile picture.
No,
you
it's
keep the mo.
just the mo, and then I have a very poor hairline, hence the hat at the moment. Not that I really care about my hairline, but I am taking medication at the moment for some pimples I have in the back of my head. What's it called? It's very boring information for anyone listening. Yes.
Do you struggle with that when you shave your head? I get the same thing.
That's what it's from. So when I saw the dermatologist, and she'd said it's almost exclusively afflicting men who shave their head regularly, and because I thought it was just ingrown hairs, and so like it got to the point where I was like, it is what it is, and I'm kind of putting some ointment on it, and my girlfriend had recommended some stuff, and it kind of did a little bit here or there, but it wasn't enough to really do anything significant. And it got to the point where I was like, this is kind of fucked. And so I saw the dermatologist, and we tried a few different things, and so anyway, I'm on a medication at the moment now, which we'll see it get worse before it gets better. So it purges. So it gets rid of it, the build up of shit, and that's where I'm at the moment. Okay, so that's why I haven't clipped my head for 2 and a bit weeks, because one, I don't want to aggravate the skin. It's already more sensitive than it has been, and it's kind of gross. So
it's actually
the hair is disguising it a little bit, so I'm happy to do so.
I feel like we're resonating highly here, because it is actually the reason I grew a luscious mullet in 2022.
Really?
Because I was getting the same problem. I used to religiously see the barber every Tuesday morning at 8:30.
Every week?
Yeah, my barber would open his shop half an hour early.
Shit.
I'd come by, we'd have a coffee, and he'd give me a haircut. And I loved having nice tapered back and sides. But I just started to break out on the back of my head all the time. And it got to the point where it was just uncomfortable, because you're like, man, this is annoying. It hurts. And then
you become self-conscious. You're just like, ugh, someone's looking at that.
Yeah, you never felt self-conscious about the back of your head in your life.
No.
And now you do.
No, exactly. Someone behind me is thinking, ugh.
Yeah.